Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for June 9th, 2022. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo.
And hi there, Mark. It's Peter Ryan here. I am generally in Montreal, Quebec, but today I am in New York City for the 2022 Nearshore Nexus event, which I can tell you has gotten off to a fantastic start. Great cocktail reception last night. And so far here on the conference floor, the mindshare has just been phenomenal. It's great to see so many familiar faces and wonderful to connect with longtime friends.
Well, as we were starting to record, I was saying to you, people have been contacting me saying we can't be in New York this week. What other events should we be attending? And of course, I recommended CXO.
That's right. CX Outsourcers is happening this year in Las Vegas on the 14th and 15th of September. If anybody wants information, if you're a BPO executive and you're interested in attending CX Outsourcers 2022, contact Mark or contact myself. Either one of us would be happy to fill you in on the details. And Mark, we're very excited to confirm that you are going to be chairing the event this year. You're going to be the man who the event starts with and the one who wraps it up.
And yes, if my new daughter can get a passport in time, then I'll see if I can bring her over to America. We'll see what happens.
Well, CX Outsourcers is all about empowering youth and getting young people involved in the industry. We would love to have your little one as a panelist.
Yeah. 2 months might be a bit too young though, but let's see.
We'll see. Exactly. But we've got a really exciting episode this week, Mark. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to interview Sara Sloman. Now, Sara is based in the United Kingdom, and I got to know her a few months ago when I undertook a roundtable about the electric vehicle industry that was put on by Icon. As many of our listeners know, Icon is a leading outsourcer based in Prague. And Sara was really a star on that roundtable, talking a lot about the CX imperative in the electric vehicle movement, which is gaining traction across Western Europe, and certainly it's coming on strong here in North America. A number of the points that Sara brought up over the course of our discussion, I think really should be heeded by the CX industry, especially those outsourcers looking to service the EV sector, especially the EV providers themselves or any organization involved in that EV ecosystem, about what needs to be done to better position themselves and their industry as being friendly to the customer of electric vehicles.
And it's funny that you mentioned Icon, because I wrote on my notes, when I knew that we were going to be talking about electric vehicles, I actually wrote on my notes, talk about Jules Little, because he, just a few days ago, he actually wrote a blog about the terrible customer experience for EV owners, how it's difficult to charge, how it's difficult to pay for a charge, all this kind of stuff. So, look out for his blog, because I think it covers many of the things that we're talking about here as well. And I think Sara's point of view is really interesting, because Paythru is focused on handling the payments for EV charging. And that's a really interesting and complex topic. I mean, if you imagine a shared charge point at your apartment building, it needs to be able to cope with anybody charging and correctly charging that person's electricity bill. And, we're seeing these kind of difficulties coming up now, interoperability. Because, basically, when we go to the gas station and fill up, you can just use cash or you can just use a credit card. But it seems with most of the EV charging points, you've got to have some form of account. And so we're still in that kind of environment where you need 5 or 6 different accounts to make sure you can fill up.
But this is it, Mark. And I think that these are a lot of the growing pains that the EV sector is facing. And if we're being perfectly blunt about it, there's a lot of people that are motivated to go out and buy an electric vehicle. People who are well-meaning, people who want to do their right by the environment, individuals that want to try and find a more sustainable way of getting around. Now, the problem is the motivation to go out and purchase one of these vehicles and then actually making the vehicle function on a regular basis without having a sense about what's involved. That could provide a massive disconnect. And quite frankly, if the support's not there to help people along as they get used to elements such as interoperability or such as locating a charging station, that could cause a real schism in terms of the idea about taking on one of these vehicles and then the satisfaction of actually being able to use it. It develops frustration. And Sara talked a lot about these different elements over the course of our chat. One thing that she talked about that I think is really important is what she calls the triple jump. Now, effectively, the triple jump in the context of EVs is an individual looking to charge their vehicle up and having to go not just to one charging station, but 2 charging stations and maybe even 3 to find one that's got availability and the availability to source a charge. So I think as we move to the interview and listening to my chat with Sara, our listeners who are perhaps in the EV market looking to try and buy one of these or that have one of these vehicles already will be able to empathize quite a lot. And as I say, executives in the EV ecosystem or the BPO space looking to try and service EVs need to listen very closely and truly take on what Sara is talking about in their own strategies.
Yeah, and I think that it's not just people focused on the environment anymore. You know, we're seeing record gas prices. We're seeing the cost of new EVs is now almost at parity with the regular petrol version. And that's predicted to actually like hit parity in the next year or so. So I think, you know, if it costs the same and you're never going to have to fill up with gas again, then there's a lot of people that will be interested just for that reason alone.
Well, as I look out my window at the petrol station across from where I live here in Montreal, and I'm seeing $2.14 a liter, an EV sounds pretty good right now.
Yeah. So let's go straight to the interview with Sara Sloman from Paythru.
The CX Files is delighted to welcome Sara Sloman, who joins us today from her home in the United Kingdom. Sara, thanks a lot for taking some time to talk to us today.
Entirely my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me on the show. We're experiencing some English summer rain, so slight delay to my arrival, but it hasn't dampened my spirit for today's conversation, which is customer.
That's great. And to use another water metaphor, I like the glass half full approach, Sara. So thank you very much. We're all about positivity at the CX Files. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the growing trends around EVs and the CX pain points or CX opportunities, as the case may be, in this very, very important segment of the automotive economy. But before we dive into that, I'd like to hear a little bit more about you, about the organization that you're working for, and your background in the EV space, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes.
Oh, it's so nice. It's really important to illustrate that for the listeners as well, because my background has always been in sustainable development, whether that's transport or environmental consultancy. And so I very naturally went through what I call the transport hierarchy with walking and cycling schemes and public transport use. But then that led on to the local sustainable transport fund and into the Go Ultra Low Emission Fund. So we rolled out a lot of electric vehicle charge points for businesses, but also consumers. So I've got to see it from all sides over the space of my career now. And I have just moved to a company called Paythru. It's a financial services company, and we specialize in processing transactions for e-mobility providers. So it's things like every time a customer tries to pay for the electricity that they're using in the charge points, it's probably us processing it behind the scenes. And it's actually quite a complex market. It's about making sure that the money goes to the right place and that it's all reconciled and the consumer isn't waiting for their pending transaction to go through, which is a pet hate of mine. We call it suspended transactions. So I can offer lots of information about how to fund charges right through to who is using them and how do we really help fleet. My job role there is I am the director of future fleet. So how do we make sure that we're building the infrastructure that can enable the transfer to electrified transport for our UK fleets?
Fantastic. Well, you're very well placed to discuss the whole element about EVs today with us for our listening audience. A good starting point, I think, would be to talk about the fact that we all know that EVs are growing as a proportion of vehicles that are coming on the road. In fact, I know here in Montreal, the dealerships can't keep up with the demand, and you're seeing more of them on the road, which is just great news all around. But something that you and I talked about in a previous roundtable that we'd participated in together related, something that really piqued my interest was what the typical EV consumer looks like. And something that came out of that discussion was the fact that there is very much some key segmentation going on. Can you talk a little bit about who the typical customer of an EV vehicle would be if you were to put them into perhaps 2 or 3 different categories?
I think it's very important to acknowledge that we are still in an emerging market. So this is very much innovation at its heart. So things are coming out, vehicles are coming onto the market now that are starting to resemble a normal car. So we've moved away from that early adopter phase, the sort of personality who likes new tech, who takes a risk, who is happy to do something a little different from their neighbor. Whereas now we're seeing the opposite of that. Neighbors are doing things and other neighbors want to do the same thing. So as humans and our behaviors, we tend to copy what's safe and what works and what's sort of the path of least resistance. And so electrified transport is just starting to be appealing in that sense. People are seeing that the longer range vehicles are offering flexibility and usability that families want. It's a little different on the fleet sector market. You've correctly identified there is a shortage of microchips, which is therefore delaying the supply of vehicles. But more than that, the demand has swelled. So I don't think anybody anywhere saw that it was going to catch on quite this fast. And certainly calls that I was taking 3 years ago were around, why are you wasting this money putting all this infrastructure in? And now it's, why are you not spending more money putting this infrastructure in? And the position I'm in my career right now is I've watched the market change from needing more vehicles to actually needing more charge points. And now the reason I've changed roles is that I think the chargers are starting to look after themselves. We're getting lots of private investment, lots of companies doing an amazing job. And so our EV consumer is now somebody who's concerned about where they're going to charge the car. So they've accepted the idea they want an electric car. They're starting to think, where will I charge it? So we're no longer EV curious, we're EV conscious, and we're excited about it. But us on the other side of the fence in the industry have got a responsibility now to kind of match up to that desire, that demand.
Okay, and that's really interesting. So from the perspective of an organization that's in the EV ecosystem, obviously there's more consumers that are coming on board. There's going to be more concerns that these consumers are going to have, more questions that they're going to want answered. How would you say that the typical EV consumer or the user of one of these vehicles is going to differ from a petrol-based car consumer? And how would you suggest that those companies in the ecosystem should anticipate being able to manage customer demands?
Well, I did quite consciously make the year 2022 the year of the consumer. And last year was the year of collaboration. And next year, 2023, I'd like to be the year of confidence. And the reason I'm saying this is because we need to be looking after the consumers. We have to be giving them an opportunity to charge their car in the same way that they would have refueled their car before. So typically you allow the normal life to unfold and you see how much petrol or diesel you've got in your tank, and you make sure you allocate time to go and fill that up. And it takes sort of between 6 and 9 minutes to do that, including going in and paying. So we're already expecting the consumer to think more carefully about timing and how long they've got. And so even if you had what we're seeing in the UK, some amazing opportunities for our what we call charge point operators, CPOs, who are turning their resource into like a in a fuel station. So you pull up and there's rows of chargers available. And once we get closer to that model, we'll see that gap shortening between what it was like when you're petrol and diesel versus what it's like now that you are electric. Because of course, in the UK, not everyone can charge at home. That's the obvious, easiest, cheapest choice. And it's the one that we would always encourage. But of course, if it's not possible for you, you are then reliant on the public network in the same way that we have been for petrol and diesel. So there are replications of behaviors there. You still have to go and seek your charge, find your charge. And what we're hoping to do at Paythru is make that process easier, particularly for fleets. So we're designing some really clever apps with our partners, which essentially procure the charge for you. It takes that legwork out of you having to plan your day, plan your journey, and plan your charging. It's a little different from roaming. Lots of discussions about roaming, how you can go from charge point to charge point without discrimination or having to sign up to new apps. It's a little different from that. It's about your journey and where you're going and which charges you'll encounter on that route. So I'm really excited to say this is the year of the consumer, because finally companies are thinking, right, we've got the equipment installed. Now we have to encourage people to use our equipment, and how best to do that. Is it through pricing? Probably. Is it through flexibility? Definitely. Is it through accessibility? So are we able to actually use the charger? Is it an easy to use charger? These are all infrastructural considerations that stem from people using the charger. So the vehicles are all different as well, different connectors, different charging points, different charging ports, forgive me. So when you go to park your vehicle, are you able to fit the vehicle into the space available to use the charger? So it's about making it universally adoptable to not just the individual car driver, but also for fleet as well. So light commercial vehicles right through to the slightly heavier trucks that we're seeing coming forward.
When we spoke last time, you had an expression that has stuck with me, and I'd love it if you could explain it. And that was the triple jump. And we're not talking about the event at the Olympics.
Oh, the triple jump. Sometimes the triple jump becomes the quadruple jump. And what I mean by this is, and it happened to me today. So I spent 3 hours in the car and I needed to charge. And I know that I don't have a home charger either. And so the triple jump, let's stick with that, is where you have to use the public network, and that's fine. And you're used to that, but you haven't planned your journey. You're just sort of taking a chance, really. You know roughly where the chargers are. Your car gives you limited information. So you go to one rapid charger and there's at least someone on it, or there's a queue. And so you're going to have to go to another, and then potentially another, and in my case today, another. So I must caveat this. I don't have a home charger, like I said. I have an average range vehicle and I live very rurally. So it's all right if you live somewhere that's got quite a high density of these charge points. This will never be a problem for you. But someone like me, and a lot of fleet drivers will encounter this as well, you're on the move and you have to get a charge. So the triple jump is an affectionate term, which just means in my head, I know to allow a little more time, because there's a high chance that the first, second, maybe even third charger will be taken. But that underpins my importance factor of like using an interoperable app that shows you your next option. Why should I have to come off the motorway 3 times to see if the charger's full? My car should know that. The app I'm using for my mapping software should know that and let me know that it was available, but now it's not. So if we use sort of a live heartbeat, if we tap into the data that's readily available from these chargers and optimize that through an app, then it'll make the user experience a lot slicker. People don't want to think. We are basic human creatures that just want to get what they need and move on. That's how we're programmed. So the EV driver at the moment is highly astute, very clever, always thinking forward, always planning. And if they don't, then they're going to be facing a long wait. You will get charged, but you will have to wait. So I could have gone to the first one and stayed at the first one, but I'd have been there half an hour or more. And I simply didn't bake that into my day.
But you touch on something there that I think is so true, that the typical EV driver is intelligent, they are astute, and that means they're more than likely going to be very discerning consumers. And as you say, with the year of the consumer, this is not a group of people that you want to alienate, because we do have choices. We have choices in which vehicles we're going to procure. We have choices in which charging stations potentially that we're going to use. So from the perspective of a CX manager anywhere across the ecosystem of EVs, what advice would you give to them as they think about formulating their customer management strategy for this very discerning group of customers as we're in 2022 and even beyond, as this becomes much more of a pervasive part of the automotive space?
I think we're still in a very much consumer transition experience phase. So the consumers of today, the electric vehicle drivers right now, are that upper end of the EV curious. So we've got the early adopters, they're in the bank. They're probably on their second, third electric vehicle by now. But it's the newer ones coming to market that are having to learn all this new technology. So if you're a manager thinking about how best to maximize this opportunity that electrification brings, just got to focus on flexibility and approachability. So developing, even just coming down to the signage that goes onto these charge points. I've often, in fact, I think every time I charge, I have to explain to the next person how to access the charger or what this means, or look out for that. So for a good example is a lot of the rapid chargers, which are 50 kilowatt or above, have, rightly so, limited time allowances for them so that you don't hog it all day, which can be, say, 90 minutes. But then the traffic sign next to it says you can only park here for 2 hours. So my brain instantly goes, well, is it an hour and a half or is it 2 hours? Well, I'll take my chances on 2 hours, and then you get a hefty fee in the post or digital inbox, and that's really not okay. It shouldn't be that confusing. If I was a CX manager right now, I'd be thinking about clear messaging, clear pricing, clear management of data. So here's your VAT receipt immediately, should you wish to expense it or submit it to your fleet manager for approval. These are elements that are remarkably missing. Even a petrol or diesel pump, you can go in and get a VAT receipt straight away. In fact, you almost have to elect out of it. They wouldn't, do you want your receipt? You go, no, I'm fine. It's the wrong way round. We should be viewing electric fuel in the same way as any other fuel and showing very clearly that pricing and the amount that you've received so that it's accountable.
That's really cool. And I'm going to flip the question around for our final point of discussion today. as more people are joining the ranks of EV users, as more people are taking on EVs in the UK, in Canada, in the US, wherever, what do you think that new customers should expect from their EV dealership or across the EV ecosystem in terms of responsive customer service?
Oh, there's a phrase going around that I really don't enjoy. Here in the UK, we just had a massive event. It was called Fully Charged Live, and that was followed up by the ITT Hub, which was the commercial vehicle equivalent, really. So one was purely consumer focused, and the other one was much more about businesses integrating electric transport. And I learned a lot from those shows, and it's very much around how do we help the driver? How do we make the driver see that this is a viable option for them? And for me, it boils down to communication rather than the word that got used all week, which was education. That really makes me cringe, because it kind of assumes that people either are ignorant or don't know or aren't intelligent enough and require a teacher. You don't require a teacher. It's a very basic step, but there's a lot of awareness raising to be done. And I'd always encourage people to find their own networks. There's lots of, in England, there's a lot of charge point operators. I've got my favorites. I go directly to them every time as a first port of call. That's just what we do. It's no different from the petrol and diesel world, where we'd go to the forecourt that had our favorite coffee shop, our favorite sandwiches, and we'd push the range of that internal combustion engine vehicle to reach the next place. There's no reason why you can't do the same with electric. So that awareness and sort of collaborative approach to make sure that it's open data, the apps are all working, the manufacturers of the vehicles are embracing this data telemetry and making sure that the in-car display shows you your next charger, regardless of which network it's on, and that the mapping is accurate. And that's something we're really trying to tackle at Paythru with our partners. So I'm excited for this year. I think next year, the year of confidence, is going to be giving that confidence to drivers more and more. We'll see a lot of approachable technology that can help people go electric and enthuse about it and work towards our clean air targets all the faster.
Well, this is fantastic. Sara, your energy is contagious, and we thank you so much for the time that you've taken to chat today about EVs. Like I say, I think that this is going to be a much greater element of how individuals are going to be consuming transportation. Obviously, regardless of what part of the world that you happen to live in. And from my perspective, you've given some fantastic insight in terms of what customers should be expecting and what the stakeholders in the EV world need to be thinking about. So we wish you a great rest of the day and good luck as we move into the year of confidence.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And please do connect and continue sending those questions through. It only helps us shape the market.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.